Hello, welcome to the first ever video on this channel. Don't know how you come across it, but glad you're here. And if you're here from the future, then well done for scrolling down this far. Well, let's just get straight into it. I've been looking for a reason to start this channel for a long time, and I've always been really passionate about movies, about TV, about comics, about superheroes and things like that. And I wanted to try and find something that I'd be able to talk about and just do it in front of the camera and talk to you guys. And I realised that one of the few things that I could genuinely talk about for hours is Spider-Man. Spider-Man's been one of those characters that's been around, especially for me, since I was a kid. I've grown up with him. He's this character that's adapted and evolved over the years. There's so many different interpretations of this one character created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and I just knew that this was definitely the thing that I needed to start off with, because I felt like it would be a great way of sort of easing not only myself in, but anyone who's just started to watch this channel, and give you an idea of my mindset when it comes to these characters and films and things like that. So what I wanted to start off with was, there's been so many different antagonists throughout the Spider-Man franchise that I thought, what if I do a little video all about the villains, all about the live action cinematic villains. So there won't be any characters from Into the Spider-Verse, won't be anyone from the video games or the animated series or any of those other shows. This is going to be purely based on the live action movies that have come out between 2002 and 2022. I'm also only going to be really talking about villains that have had actual direct contact with Spider-Man, so people like Alistair Smythe, like Venom and Carnage from the Venom movies. They aren't going to be part of this list, so you've been warned. So let's get straight to it. These are the best and worst villains. So just before I start getting into this, I do need to say that this is just how I feel, so if you disagree, that's absolutely fine. If you do have your own personal favourites or personal ones that you just don't like, let me know down in the comments, and it'll be just really nice to see what everyone else thinks as well. So why don't we just get straight into it. So I'm going to start off with the worst, and we're going to go through into the best. So let's start off with the worst. The Prowler from Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, a lot of you are probably saying, well, he wasn't really a villain in Spider-Man Homecoming, and you're right. But he is still the Prowler, and this is the first live action debut of this character. And that's partly why he's so far down on this list. Like, he's right down at the bottom because he doesn't actually become a villain at all, and I don't know if they are planning on doing that sometime in the future in Spider-Man 4 or beyond. He's played by Donald Glover in the movie, and he is a genuinely fantastic choice for this, especially when if you are somebody who does have a bit of in-depth Spider-Man knowledge, you're probably aware of him actually being the inspiration for the physical look for Miles Morales. So it's actually quite nice that he was involved in the movie. But yeah, it's the reason why he is the lowest on this list is purely because he does exist in the MCU, but he isn't a villain just yet. He is interested in a couple of grapple climbers, which they do say in the movie at one point, but that's about as far as the villainous side of him really goes, so that's why he's this far down on the list. The Gentleman, Amazing Spider-Man 1 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, this is a bit of a strange one because he's one of those villains that we don't really know about, and obviously because Amazing Spider-Man 3 never happened, we never really got to see who he was. But he's there. He does have antagonistic qualities. He's obviously against Peter in some way. We don't know why. We don't know any of that stuff, whether that actually was going to be answered, whether it was going to be satisfying if they did. But yeah, it was just disappointing what they were trying to do, because they were originally trying to set up a Sinister Six movie, and obviously they were trying to get him as like the Nick Fury character and get him to be the one to bring them all together, which is not the worst idea, but it feels a bit more like they were trying to just set up the next movie, which is kind of the biggest issue I have with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, where it just feels like they exist purely to set up the next movie. And he's a prime example of that, because he's only in these movies to tease the next one, and he's just not a satisfying villain in any way. He's played by Michael Massey, and I personally, I'm not quite sure who the actor is off the top of my head, but it seems strange why they decided to cast somebody and then just completely kept him in shadow throughout this entire time. You don't even see his face, and it's like, well, why? Because there was a lot of theories around who this character was going to end up being, especially when he showed up in the first movie, but everyone was wrong, because that wasn't who it was. But yeah, it was just a disappointing antagonist, and that's why he's this far down the list. The Tinkerer, Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, the Tinkerer is one of those villains that I only really sort of became aware of through the Web of Shadows game. So I was kind of curious to see what they were going to do with him in a live action movie. And obviously they've moved away from the elderly gentleman, they've turned him into the guy who plays him in this movie, Michael Chernus. If I haven't said that right, sorry. He's actually quite a good choice for the role. He does have this... he does feel quite unique in this movie, because there's so many characters that are in the Homecoming movie that it is hard for people to really sort of stand out, and they do manage to find a really good way for him to be his own character without necessarily being villainous, but he does have a part to play with the overall plot, and he is one of the masterminds behind a lot of the robberies. And I really love how they managed to incorporate a lot of the alien technology from the Avengers movies and combine them with a lot of the technology that we have available today and turn them into something that's actually quite impressive. Because it's just a really clever idea for them to actually do this. It really brought the whole universe together, and I think Spider-Man is supposed to be like the ground level character, and seeing the way that he was interacting with the MCU and having something like the Tinkerer actually using all this stuff, it just made a lot of sense, and it made everything feel a lot more connected. Okay, so we're actually starting to get into the villains that actually meet Spider-Man now. So next up, Scorpion, Spider-Man Homecoming. Now again, similar case to the Prowler, you don't actually see him in the costume, and unless you know all the villains' names, you probably won't even figure out that that's who this person is. But Scorpion is one of the characters that I have wanted to see in live action for a long time, and it was just really cool actually getting to see Mac Gargan on screen. So he is there, he is going to be a villain at some point if they ever do that. It's not like Marvel haven't skipped over a few villains in the past, but it'd be great to actually see a Scorpion in live action. In the movie, he's played by Michael Mando, who most of you might know from Better Call Saul, and I haven't actually seen the show quite recently. I am actually quite on board with him being the Scorpion. I think he is actually a really good, intimidating choice for it, and if they do follow through with it, I think it could be a really interesting direction to go in for this character. It definitely makes sense where the character is at the time of this video going out. If you have seen No Way Home, spoilers, it does make sense having a character like this going after Spider-Man, especially because we do have Jonah Jameson within the MCU. He does look closer to how the Scorpion might be. His arms all bandaged up, or his eyes are a little bit yellow and scarred, and he's definitely got a grudge against the character, so it definitely makes sense that he would be one of the better choices to do. The Rhino, Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yeah, I actually put him above the Scorpion, but again, they don't really do an awful lot with him. The Rhino's one of those villains that I am very conflicted on, because on the one hand, within the context of the movie where he appears, it does make sense and it does fit what the movie was trying to do, because he's not the central villain, he's just the side quest. So it made sense where his character appears. You know, he makes one appearance at the beginning as just Alexis Davidovich, and later on in the movie when he's actually in a mechanical rhino suit. In terms of the costume, I actually kind of like the animatronic look, but I'm not a huge fan of the missiles and the machine guns and everything. So that's probably why I keep saying that I'm a bit split on this character. You know, Paul Giamatti is a really good choice for the role, and you know, if they do a Rhino in the future, I think he could be really good. I mean, he is a fantastic actor, but I don't know whether it was the direction, whether it was him, whether it was just the script, anything. I don't know, but his performance in Amazing Spider-Man 2, I just don't feel was really that good. But Marvel do seem to be bringing a lot of older actors and characters back, so potentially we could have a Rhino sometime in the future, and they give him a bit more of a sympathetic angle, and I think that might actually really help benefit this character. But until then, this is where the character is. The Elementals, Spider-Man Far From Home. Yeah, I put the VFX creations above the Rhino, but in fairness, there is a reason for it. The Elementals make appearances throughout Spider-Man Far From Home. They are, spoilers, they are illusions from Mysterio. But even though they are illusions, the reason why I've put them at this point in the list is because I feel there's a lot of variety to the characters, well, not the characters, but the sequences where these things appear, because it forces Spider-Man into a position that he's never really been in before. Like, we've never really seen him go up against these big, huge creatures before. So it's just a really nice idea to have him doing this and seeing not exactly the best interpretations of Hydra Man and Molten Man, but this is probably the closest that we're actually going to get to see in the Molten Man and Hydra Man and is it Cyclone and I think it might be Sandman, the last one. It's probably the closest to seeing those first three in live action, so it's pretty cool getting to see some sort of interpretation of them, even though they're not real. I do like how they are depicted. I do like the effects work that's gone into them. They do look fantastic, and their action scenes are really clever and they are done really well. Goblin, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This one's another one that's a bit conflicting for me, because on one hand I do like Dane DeHaan. I do think that he is a good choice for the role, and I think what he's able to do with it is pretty good, but it's just so rushed, and I'm not a fan of what they were trying to do with it. I know it's more based on like the Ultimate Comics, where the Goblin's more of a mutated beast rather than, you know, just a guy with a bit of personality. And you know, I think if maybe if they went all the way and they'd let it sort of build up over a couple of movies, then maybe it might have made a bit more sense. Maybe it might have felt better. I mean, it is a very there's so much that's going on in that movie that it's impossible to really focus on this character and make him more sympathetic than he already was. I mean, I like what they were trying to do, especially because James Franco was great. I'll get on to him soon, but I liked that they were trying to differentiate him as much as possible from that interpretation of the character, but not everything for it worked for me. I don't like the design because it just doesn't look right. It's not what the Goblin should look like. I don't mind how the glider looks. I think the way that they sort of blended together the armour and the mutated look, I think kind of works, but I just don't think that it was the right direction for them to really sort of go with this character. And when I say rushed, one of the things that I mean by that is because it doesn't really make sense how they have Norman Osborn have like this degenerative disease which turns him into like this goblin looking thing, and having him saying, oh, that it started at your age, Harry, and Harry's developing the exact same symptoms, but he's rushing to get this cure, even though Norman's about 17 old years older than him, so he's got quite a bit of time to find some sort of cure. So I don't know, it just felt really rushed what they were trying to do, and I wasn't too much of a fan of what they were trying to do. I can appreciate their attempt, but it could have been a little bit better and a bit more thought out. The Shocker 1 and 2, Spider-Man Homecoming. Shocker's one of those characters that I have been curious to see if they would actually adapt it for live action, and we got two in one movie. One played by Logan Marshall Green and the other played by Bokeem Woodbine. Personal preference, I think Bokeem was a little better in the role, but that could be purely because, you know, he lasts a bit longer. But I do appreciate what they were trying to do with this character, because there's nothing really to him. He is a thug in many ways, and I think what they did with him was pretty spot on to who the character is. We didn't really get him sort of shouting "Shocker," but you know, it was just really fun to get to see this character realised in live action, even though there's two different interpretations of him. I do like how they adapted his costume in quite a believable way, even just the way that, you know, they got the yellow puffy jacket with all the little design pattern on it and everything. It just looked actually quite good. I'm disappointed why we never got that test costume or whatever that was. I don't know what that costume was for. The one that leaked about a year before the movie came out, and it looks spectacular. It is brilliantly done, but I don't understand why we never got to see it in live action, or why it changed, or even why the action figures are so different as well. But yeah, what they managed to do with the Shocker was great, and I really did appreciate them trying to adapt this character. He's not fantastic, he's not they are not the most thought out characters, but I do really appreciate that they did give a lot more personality to this character. Shocker! Electro, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man No Way Home. Electro is one of those characters that I am a little conflicted on, because his initial appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 2 I wasn't a huge fan of. In fact, these would have been a bit lower down on this list, but it was semi-redeemed a little bit in No Way Home, and I really did appreciate that they actually managed to not necessarily update him, but they made him a bit more Jamie Foxx. Okay, so let's at least try and get into who the character initially was. Back in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it's Max Dillon is just a electrician who is an absolute nobody, who everybody ignores, everybody looks down on, and the story that they were trying to go with him, I didn't mind. I actually quite liked the idea of him being this nobody and now suddenly getting this chance to shine and be this almost like a god in a way, and it was just a really interesting take on this character. But it was just too over the top, and it didn't work. I think especially because the tone that they had gone for in the Amazing Spider-Man franchise wasn't very consistent, so it didn't help having like a really serious movie followed by this really over the top campy, almost Batman and Robin level campiness kind of movie. And I just wasn't a fan of what they were trying to do with this version of Electro. I liked the look of him, the blue electricity, and especially like when he's in the hoodie and he's in Times Square. I think he looks great, and I think they do bring the electricity powers to life really well. So a little shout out to the effects guys who worked on that movie. But it sort of fell apart a little for me when you see him in like his updated super costume, like the rubber one with the little lightning bolts, and I just don't think it looked really that good. and yeah, I wasn't really a huge fan. But then coming into No Way Home and seeing Jamie Foxx come back into the role, give him a bit of a makeover, they actually managed to adapt the more yellow look that Electro's we are more familiar with from Electro. And I think they do it in a really clever way, and I really liked how it was, because the power's different in different universes, and I think it did make him a lot better. I think because he was a bit more laid back, I think because he was a bit more relaxed, I think it worked better and he was a lot more fun. And for that reason I think this is kind of where Electro really is on this ranking. The new Goblin, Spider-Man 3. So when it comes to this version of the Goblin, this is definitely a much better version than the version that we got in Amazing Spider-Man 2. In terms of where they are ranked on this list, I mean they are quite close together, because they do have issues, especially when it comes to what they do with him in this story. Because for all intents and purposes, what they did with James Franco's version of the character, the build up to it is brilliant. It is so well done. It is so done in such a good way that you do feel a lot of sympathy towards this character, and you can understand exactly where he's coming from, even though you don't agree with it. But the relationship that they were developing between this version of Harry and this version of Peter, it did make sense that this is ultimately where it was going to go. For the first, was it like 20 minutes or so of the movie, it does seem like we are going to get the satisfying payoff to this rivalry that's been built up over these 3 movies, and then they knock him out and he loses his memory. So in terms of the design, they've obviously gone for a bit more of a ninja kind of look to him, where he's got like a black tactical gear and like swords, and he's not even riding a glider, he's riding something called a sky stick, which I really wanted when I was 11. So I can appreciate what they were trying to do with Harry, because obviously he doesn't want to wear the Goblin suit. He wants to wear something that's just going to get the job done. And I personally think it looks kind of cool, but I would have liked it to have been a bit more, well, Goblin. It is a really disappointing direction for them to go in, and I feel like if they had kept Harry as one of the central villains in this, I think it would have worked better. I think the movie has so much going on in it that I think they definitely needed to shave down what it was that they were doing. But if they kept him as like one of the main focuses of it, and have maybe not necessarily have him become the Goblin, but have him be conflicted on whether or not he is going to become the Goblin and then save him for the next one, or have him be the Goblin in this version, in this film, and have that be the biggest bit of conflict that Peter has when he's got the black suit on. To me that makes a little bit more sense, and it adds up within regards to what they were trying to do with the story. And they do try and go there. There are bits that do have that sort of emotion that you are looking for, and I think the overall payoff is quite an emotional climax for it, but it is quite disappointing that this is where it all sort of went, and I would have liked a bit more from them. Venom, Spider-Man 3. Yeah, I mean both villains are quite similar where they are ranked in this list. The reason why I feel like Venom is a slightly better villain is because I feel like they do follow through with his character a lot more, and I do appreciate what they were trying to do. I mean the Black Suit saga, I don't think that they've done right yet on screen. Maybe they'll do that one day in the MCU. It does seem like they are building up towards that, so hopefully we could get a new interpretation of Venom sometime in the future. For this one, for the version that we got with Topher Grace in the role, I can definitely see what it was that they were trying to do with this version of the character. They were trying to make him like a darker version of Peter, and I think it worked, kind of. But it did sort of lack a little bit of what made Venom who he was and why he was so big and strong. But yeah, I can see why they decided to go in a different direction to it, and especially since Sam Raimi wasn't really a fan of the character and didn't want to put him in the movie. So yeah, I can definitely see why he wasn't exactly the best interpretation of the character. But I do like what they were trying to at least do with Venom, because they do set him up really well. They do have his origin story, and it is so much better than what they did in the Venom movie. But it is rushed. It is so quick how it all comes about, because not forgetting the symbiote suit and the symbiote saga doesn't really start in the movie until about an hour in, and Venom doesn't actually show up until half an hour before the end. And you can't do that story in that amount of time. It's just not possible. I feel like if they wanted to do it better, I think what they should have done is have the black suit be in the movie from as early on as possible, and have him get rid of it right at the end, and have Venom be a cliffhanger leading into Spider-Man 4 with him as the main villain. That to me makes a bit more sense. For what we got, I think they did do as well an adaptation as possible. And design wise, I do like this version of Venom. I do think he does look quite scary, even though I think he definitely could have looked a bit bigger, but they were trying to go for a bit more of a realistic approach, so I can appreciate that they were trying to make him look a bit more Spider-Man like. So in terms of the design, I do kind of like how he looks, and I think overall I think he is one of the better villains, but I think they could have just done a lot more with him. The Lizard, The Amazing Spider-Man, and Spider-Man No Way Home. The Lizard is one of those characters that I've always had a bit of an appreciation for. I wouldn't necessarily say he was one of my favourite villains, but I think he's one of the ones that I've always been the most interested in, because I've always liked his story. I think what they did with him in not only the comics but in Amazing Spider-Man is a very relatable thing that he is trying to do. He's just a scientist trying to do good, and he wants to regrow his arm, and there is a lot of sympathy that you do have for this character when you see, like where in some versions where it's like he just wants to pick up his son and things like that. That is definitely one of the things I really like about the Lizard, and the fact that he's one of Peter's closest friends as well. It is a really clever villain for Spider-Man to really take on, because underneath the scales he's his friend, and I think that they do try and do that as well as possible in the movie. In the film he's played by Rhys Ifans, and I think he is a good choice, but I think they could have made him be a bit more friendly towards like his earlier appearances, because he does come across as a little bit sinister straight away. I think that's something that they could have handled a little bit better. Like in the Sam Raimi movies, I can't remember the guy's name, but the way that they were setting up his version of the Lizard, if they were ever going to do that version, I did like that he was a little bit friendlier and he was a bit more of a mentor for Spider-Man, so I did like that they were starting to go in that direction. But in terms of what they were doing in The Amazing Spider-Man, I think they do his story really well. Again, it is one that is quite quick, and I would have liked them to have taken their time and sort of built up to it a bit more. And I think having Spider-Man's origin story at the same time as this other origin story, it's a bit of a balancing act, and I don't think it really sort of works as well as it should have done. In terms of the design, again, this is another one where I'm quite split on, because the design of the Lizard has grown on me over the years, and I do appreciate the odd little reference here and there to the lab coat, which he does wear a couple of times, but I would have liked him to look a bit more reptilian rather than human. I get why they were trying to do it, because obviously the reptile mouth is a bit difficult to move in the same way that human mouth does, but even though like Rocket seems fine, and like if going to actual lizards, Smaug in The Hobbit, he seemed to look absolutely fine, so I don't see why they couldn't have done that. But yeah, overall design, I don't mind it, but I think they could have made a few little tweaks here and there to make him look a little bit better. I think the CGI on him is great, he looks fantastic, but yeah, I think that they could have done a little bit more to him. And in terms of his appearance in No Way Home, he's one of the lesser villains. He's really just there just to make up the numbers and acknowledge that, yes, this is a villain that did appear. And yes, I would have liked him to have done a bit more with him, but in fairness, it would have taken away from somebody else. So I don't mind so much. I am happy that he was in the movie, and I think it was great seeing him alongside the other villains. So this is going to start getting a bit more controversial. I think the next one's going to be one of the most controversial of the lot. In 5th place we have the Green Goblin, played by William Dafoe in Spider-Man and Spider-Man No Way Home. Basically Spider-Man's Joker. He is one of the most iconic antagonists that Spider-Man has ever gone up against, and I think that having him be the choice that they went for the first movie was a really good idea, and I think it definitely makes sense for them to just go for the biggest villain that they had just in case they weren't going to make any more. In terms of performance and everything, I think William Dafoe is absolutely fantastic in the movie. I think he does go to, not necessarily say over the top, but I think he could have been a little bit scarier in that movie. I should say right now that I am more basing this on his appearance in the 2002 movie rather than No Way Home. If it was just No Way Home on its own, he would definitely be higher up on this list. I think what they did with him in that film was brilliant. They made him so much more scarier and intimidating, and I really love the contrast more between Norman and the Goblin, because in the 2002 movie it didn't really feel too much like a split personality in the same way, but there wasn't as much of a distinction as it was. It sort of felt like Norman was happy to be the Goblin in a way, like he was able to just be himself, so it didn't really feel like the Goblin was a force that was trying to take over. I think that's what they did better in No Way Home than they did in Spider-Man, if that's what they were trying to go for. But yeah, I think he is much better in No Way Home than he was in the 2002 movie. In terms of the design for him, I've never really minded how he looked in the original film. I was never 100% sure on it. I wasn't really keen on like the body armour, but I suppose maybe that's the only way that they could really sort of adapt that costume. I mean, they never really got around to doing the Captain America costume until very late on. So yeah, I can definitely see why they sort of went for the design choices that they went for. And the helmet, I am not really too keen on, because again, one of the reasons why the No Way Home version of him is better is because you can see William Dafoe, you can see his performance, you can see more of him, and that's one of the things that makes him a lot scary, because you can actually see just how Goblin-like he can be without the mask. So yeah, I've never really been 100% on the design of it. I do appreciate the little purple tinge that it does have, but I feel like it could have been a little bit better. In fact, there actually is a version of the costume that is floating around online. I will try and get that clip for this, that actually shows what they were trying to do originally, and it was more of an animatronic look where the eyes would move and the mouth was completely William Dafoe's, and I don't know why they didn't go for it. You know, maybe because it wouldn't have been as believable, but you know, those movies do have a bit more of a fantasy element than many of the more modern ones, so I don't think it would have been completely out of place. But yeah, I think overall the Goblin is one of the better villains that they have done, but I think sometimes there are things that do sort of weigh him down just a little bit, but I do really appreciate what they did with the character. It's another thing that's going to be a bit of a catchphrase. I appreciate what they did with the character. I've said it so many times during this now, I didn't even realise how much I was saying it. But yeah, let's go on to the 4th place, shall we? The Sandman, Spider-Man 3 and Spider-Man No Way Home. This is one of the reasons why I can never really be too disappointed with Spider-Man 3. The Sandman is a brilliant villain. I really love what they did with him. He is very sympathetic, and I think he's one of the more mature villains that they have. I mean, like with Goblin, with Doc Ock, they are much more comic booky in many elements, and I feel like what they did with Flint Marko and with Thomas Hayden Church he really grounds it in a more grown-up way, because Spider-Man 3 does feel like a more grown-up movie, and I think his villain really does suit that movie. In terms of like effects and the costume and everything, I think he looks fantastic. He is one of the best adaptations of a comic book villain in one of the Spider-Man movies, right down to the way that they have the green striped t-shirt and what they did with the sound effects as well. Like they had to, I don't know whether they had to make their own new software just in order to do it, because it had never been done before, but it's so well done, considering like one of the best scenes in the movie is completely CGI, where the Sandman's trying to just put himself together and there's not a single word of dialogue, there's no live action, anything. It is all visuals, and you understand exactly who the character is and what he wants, and he is absolutely fantastic, and he is definitely one of the best Spider-Man villains that they have done in a live action movie. Okay, so we're kind of getting into the top 3 here now. What I will say at this point is the top 4, like from Sandman up to these next 3, it does bounce around a little bit between who my favourite is, and it depends what sort of mood I'm in, really. But I really had to sort of look at this a bit more, how I felt at the time when I watched these movies, and so for that reason, next place, Mysterio, Spider-Man Far From Home. I was really curious to see what they were going to do with Mysterio in Far From Home, because when they announced that he was going to be in the movie, like most fans, I said, oh, he's definitely going to be the villain. And then the marketing started to come out, and you see him as a hero, and it's portraying him as a hero, and you're like, okay, but it's Mysterio, like he's lying, obviously he's lying. And the best thing that they did with him in that movie is they do trick you enough to not necessarily say that, oh no, he won't be a villain, but to have doubt that he might be, or that something is going to happen to make him become a villain later on down the line. So I think having the rug pulled out from under you and seeing who he really is, I think it's such a really great, gleeful scene. He's one of those villains that I always look forward to seeing. I think design point, I think he is absolutely ridiculous, but Marvel have actually adapted this costume. It looks incredible. It is one of the best costumes in the MCU, and I think Jake Gyllenhaal is phenomenal casting. He is an absolutely brilliant choice for this role, and there really is nobody else who could have done this role. I mean, maybe Bruce Campbell, but what they did with the character was absolutely brilliant. Like, the reason why he's third on this list is purely for motivation reasons. Like he basically just wants attention, really, and you know, it's okay, but I think that they could have gone a bit more with him. There are people who do say that he is a bit more of an Iron Man villain, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but he has more conflict with Spider-Man than he does Iron Man, so it's definitely a Spider-Man villain rather than Iron Man. The way that they bring his abilities to life as well is so brilliant. Now, I was curious to see if they were actually going to go into like a trippy sort of experience with Mysterio, and they not only do it, but I think it's an incredible sequence. It's so well made, and the way that they adapted the illusion technology so that it's a bit more drones that can move and project rather than little hollow cubes, it makes a lot more sense, and it's a lot more believable, and it makes them a bit more threatening, because these things can hurt, they can kill. So having this threat actually be in there, it really does elevate that scene into something else. It is so well done, it is so well made, considering it is like 90% CGI. It looks incredible. I'm so happy with what they were able to do with Mysterio. I think it looks brilliant. I think the casting was great, and what they were able to do with him and how they adapted him was brilliant. And the controversy doesn't stop here, because in second place we have Doc Ock, Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man No Way Home. Yeah, I'm aware most of you more than likely will put him in first place, and I don't blame you. at all. I mean, as I say, it really does bounce between these top few villains for me, because Doc Ock is a brilliant character, and I think what they were able to do with him in this movie, they really do update him enough for the 2004 film. Obviously, there's definitely certain things that they couldn't really adapt with regards to the comics, so it made sense for his machine to be a bit more fusion based, with it being solar powered energy, because it does bring it up to a more modern day presence. And of course, with him coming back into No Way Home as well, the way that they were able to use the nanotechnology on the arms and adapt that into this movie as well, and it just really worked. I'm sort of bumbling over my words a little bit, because this is my first proper video doing something like this before, so I'm just trying to sort of get into it a bit more. So with regards to Doc Ock, I think what they were able to do, especially with the arms, because the iconic image of him with the arms, they really brought them to life incredibly well. It's a balance of both CGI and puppetry, and it works fantastic, because it does trick you enough to not necessarily know what's the real thing and what isn't, and that's what makes him look a bit more real. With regards to him being a bit adapted into a different setting, it does make sense that they went with the direction that they did. They made him a lot more sympathetic. They gave him Rosie, his wife, they gave him a bit more of likability, and I really like the relationship that he develops with Peter, because it really does help the battles later on, because it is a bit more personal, and it is a bit more, there's a lot more riding on Spider-Man to not necessarily hurt his friend, but he still has to stop him. So in many ways it's still similar to the Lizard, but I just feel like it is a lot more developed, and I think it is much better. And also, we can't forget those action sequences, because this is kind of peak Spider-Man in many ways, because they were able to do something that hadn't really been done in a live action comic book movie. They haven't been able to go this extreme. Like things like Superman and Batman, they were able to sort of do enough, but they couldn't push it too far. But Spider-Man 2 really did sort of elevate that, and it really did set the standard for what you could do within a comic book movie. So I understand why so many people will say that Spider-Man 2 is one of their favourites, like including the effects, the choreography, the way that they were able to sprinkle in little bits of the story here and there. That is the only sort of issue with regards to that fight, because it does sort of come out of nowhere, but for what they were able to do with it is an incredible sequence. And in terms of the design of him, I do like the trench coat look that they went for him, because it does I don't necessarily think that the green and yellow jumpsuit would have looked very good, but I think that they do make him look pretty intimidating. I do really appreciate his groundedness, now they're able to make him look like he could actually exist in this world. On a side note, I do have to say that if I was comparing Doc Ock's, my favourite interpretation of him is the one from the PS4 game, even right down to the design. I feel like if No Way Home hadn't had the multiverse stuff, I feel like that should have been the Doc Ock that we got. But I really did like that they brought Alfred Molina back, and I really do love that they were able to preserve his story, because it is one of the definitive villain arcs in many ways, and bringing him back as a villain, it did raise a few red flags here and there, because many people were wondering what it was that they were going to do with him. But I really loved that they were able to kind of bring that back into it in a way, and not necessarily having him be just a full-on villain. I mean, he does get a really great action sequence on the bridge, but they do bring back the good side of him later on, and I really love his little interactions with Toby as well, because that was just absolute joy to see. And overall, I think that this is one of the best villains that they have had within a Spider-Man movie, and I really love what they were able to do with Alfred Molina's interpretation. He's a fantastic villain, but he's still my number 2 choice, so we're going to find out who was number 1. But before we actually do that, I just need to reiterate again that this is just how I feel about these villains. This is just my opinion, so if you disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. Let me know down in the comments what you think. So here we are at number 1. And in first place, the best villain in any of the Spider-Man movies is J. Jonah Jameson. No, just kidding. It's Avi Arad. No, obviously number 1 for me, Vulture, Spider-Man Homecoming. I said this was going to be a little bit controversial, and I know there are going to be a lot of people who will disagree with this, and I said that's absolutely fine. But for me, I think the Vulture really does represent the best of what Spider-Man villains can be, and the way that they went with this character, I think it surprises even long-time fans, because there are definitely elements of the character that you do not expect. I did get audible gasps in my screening. So seeing this interpretation of the character and seeing him updated for this modern world, and especially within the MCU as well, because they were able to push him a bit further, he is a brilliant interpretation of this character. I think Michael Keaton is a fantastic choice for this role. I do know that when Spider-Man 4 was in development, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4, they were planning on having John Malkovich. I'll be curious to see how that works, but Michael Keaton, absolutely fantastic. I love what they did with his look. I think the way that they adapted not only the fur around his neck, but the way that the wings look, he genuinely does look quite scary. It looks really intimidating. I think the way that they brought to life like the anti-gravity technology, it works really well, especially within the context of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the way that the Tinkerer is able to bring that suit to life. It really is a brilliant interpretation, because there's so much that they did do with this character, from the personality, from the costume, from the effects, from the way that they just brought to life this comic book character that really does look kind of ridiculous at times. And they made him one of the most sympathetic of all as well, because he is one of the most relatable villains as well, with his backstory just sort of going against the higher ups. You know, he's messed around by Tony Stark and he wants revenge for that, and this kid keeps getting in the way. I genuinely love what they were able to do with the Vulture. I love what they did with him, everything about him. For me, he is the best on-screen Spider-Man villain that we've had in a live-action movie. I would like to see him again sometime in the future, maybe in a Sinister Six. And considering how No Way Home wrapped up, it'd be curious to see what it is that they do with not only him but many of the other villains who are in the MCU at this point in time. So we've made it to the end. That is the worst and best live action villains of Spider-Man. So in terms of the video, this is the first thing that's going to be that is on my channel right now. Definitely a bit of a learning curve. There's a few things that I have learned trying to do this, but in terms of what the video is about, the villains of these movies are fantastic, and I think they are some of my favourite villains in comic books of all time. I think Spider-Man is one of my favourite characters, and I think this was one of the better videos to do first, because it was just something that I'd be able to just talk and rattle on about, and hopefully not too long, and hopefully you haven't got bored watching this. But yeah, I really appreciate you sticking around this long, if you have stuck around this long. So I haven't really got much more to say, other than if you do want to see more content, please please subscribe. If you have anything to say, put it down in the comments. Nice things, please. Well, critiques are actually welcome as well. I more than appreciate that, as long as it's nice critiquing. But yeah, if in terms of the list, if you agree or disagree with anything, please let me know down below what it is that you think, what your top 10 list is, what villains you want to see in the future, what future stories you want to see, whether you want to see Spider-Man 4 or Amazing Spider-Man 3 or whatever Tom Holland's getting up to. Definitely let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I hope to see you soon.